stuff going.
Very nice. And how long do you go?
We'll be
About an hour. Well, welcome everyone. Hello. Welcome to our Sunday night creative prayer time. I thought it might be fun just because we're all over the place and still getting to know each other to put in the chat just your name and where in the world you are so that we can just kind of know who we're talking to. Where in the world you are tonight. You can be as specific as you want to be. My bad. Right. Well, we are here tonight for Artscape to Heartscape, hosted by Adrienne Reedy with our very special guest, Michael Shapiro. And I'm going to let Adrienne introduce in just a minute, but just to, by way of introduction about tonight and what we do on this 5 o'clock time on Sundays for our creative prayer. Basically, it is creative. And it's a little different in the way, you know, we're going to have a conversation tonight, but we definitely see art making as something that's meant to be. It's designed as an act of prayer. The not just the actual finished product, but the process itself and everything that goes into that. And so this is a time for us to be able to hear from other artists and how they use their gifts and express the things that are inside of them, but also respond to what's going on in the world and encounters with other people so that hopefully we can glean from that, but also to just encourage and be a blessing. So we're really grateful that you're with us tonight, Michael, and just to be able to hear a little bit more about your process and your work.
Thank you.
I'm just going to briefly just open us in prayer and then we'll begin. So Creator God, thank you for this time to be together. Thank you for your creative people and the gift of art to the world. And we pray that you would bless Michael in this time and that this time would be pleasing to you. Amen. So Adrienne, take us away.
Yeah. So again, Michael, I just want to thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to meet with us. When I met my friend Rebecca and she introduced me to your piece, The Voices of the Holocaust, I thought that the piece was so moving. It literally stopped me in my tracks and it brought me to tears. And that doesn't happen too often. I'm a musician. I love music. I'm a gospel artist. But when I heard the piece, and I was just so excited that she had said that you were approachable and that she would make the introduction because I wanted to meet you. And so thank you so much for being who you are and being responsive to the gift that you have, and you bring it to us and to the world in the way that you do. I mean that from the bottom of my heart. And so what I like to do with this Artscape to Heartscape is Convergence is a community of artists. And I just love introducing artists to my family at Convergence and for Convergence to meet new artists. And so that's why I asked you to come, because sometimes we have visual artists and we have musicians and composers and we have, writers and poets and so forth, all different types of creatives. And so what I would love for us to accomplish tonight is we want to hear from you. I want you to share, how did you get from that little boy in Brooklyn to this man who's doing the kind of work that you are doing? Help us through the process of your journey. You and I, we spoke the other day, and you have a very interesting background. And I'd love for you to share this with my friends. And so that's what I'm hoping we would hear about your work, and also your creative process, and how your faith, however that may what it looks like to you. I would really want us to talk about those types of things, and how you have become the man that you are, and the creative that you are, this creative genius. Let's start there, okay? So tell us about the beginning, your beginning and your background. And I'm gonna have us listen to some of your work, okay, later on, but talk to us.
First on spirituality. And blessings to everybody this happy Sunday. I would say that whether you say amen, amen, or amen, it's the same word. And whether one person's story is different than another person's story because of where we're born, how we're raised. I'm talking about the good parts. All stories are equal. Whether there's the stories of Hindu people, Buddhist people, Christian people, Muslim people, Jewish people, means no difference in the world. Atheistic people, different stories. And who told these stories? They were largely written by men, not women, which is a fundamental issue I have often, sometimes with some of these things. But whosever story is told versus another story, one is not better than the other. And no story can be used for tyranny. So one thing that I've had from very early on in my days, seeing photographs that I never saw before when I was 5 years old in the 50s, of pictures of the horribleness of Dachau and Auschwitz. When I saw those pictures, I was shaken to my core, little boy in Brooklyn, shaken to my core. I said, and then I saw relatives coming off boats with numbers on their arms, carrying cardboard suitcases, who had survived the horrors. Now, my parents were both American. My mother was born in the Ukraine, and she fled in 1920 because my grandfather, who was a mercantile type and was making good enough money, was told by someone that the Bolsheviks who had taken over were going to kill him because he was a capitalist. So in the middle of the night, they fled down to Odessa and took a boat. And I actually have the records of this boat with my mother's name on it. And she came here as an infant. My father was born here. His mother and his father were born in Poland. Now, where does this all come back from? My dad worked as a court reporter, but before that, he was a jazz musician and a swing musician in the 40s and 30s. And he was a klezmer, meaning the high clarinet, the high Yiddish clarinet, the squeaky clarinet, weddings and bar mitzvahs, and opening of stores in Brooklyn, that kind of stuff. And I grew up first in Brooklyn, visiting my grandma. And, when you told me, Adrienne, about your background, well, here's some of mine. And my dad, being a jazz musician, knew a lot of people. He and Ella were childhood friends, as I mentioned to you. And whenever there was a Baptist church that we could go to, we went. Not for the religion, because my parents were kind of secular, but for the music, which was exceptional. Now, I'm not a jazz composer, although my music has the flexibility of jazz. I'm an American composer who has derivation somewhat in Europe, and who's worked in Europe a great deal over my career. But you talk about how did it all begin? Well, my folks were working class people. They lived in a 3-family house. Initially, they lived in the Shore Haven apartments, not far from where Woody Guthrie was raising his daughter Nora, who I know, at the Beach Haven apartments, which were owned by a certain Fred Trump. You can't make this stuff up. In New York, you cannot make this stuff up.
Right.
And you know, this was, I heard from a very early age, jazz and swing and pop music. But my dad saw my talent, which was very clear very early, and took me to concerts. So I heard Stokowski many times, Leonard Bernstein, Otto Rubinstein, Nathan Milstein, Renaissance May, Herbert von Karajan, but also twice live, Louis Armstrong, Coleman Hawkins, Buck Clayton, who was a very close friend of my dad's, Woody Herman, Stan Kenton, big bands. He exposed me to everything. And as a result, you know, I would just take it in. He was a court reporter in the Supreme Court because my mother wanted him home and not playing club dates. So he got a job doing stenotype machine, which he was a virtuoso at, so talented to hear. And so one day he said, Mike, you want to come and see William Warfield sing Porgy and Bess at the city center with New York State, the City Opera? Sure. So that was my first opera, seeing William Warfield sing Porgy, which is phenomenal. But my second opera was at the old Metropolitan Opera, not the new one, but the old one in the 30s. He got the tickets from Judge Conway, who was one of his presiding judges. Judge Conway was a guy who wore collared shirts and starch collars, and he was a real 1920s type lawyer. And he became chief judge of the Court of Appeals of New York. And when he was retired, they made him a special justice of the New York State Supreme Court in Brooklyn, in Kings County, when my father was on the stenotype machine. So Judge Conway said, I can't use these tickets. Would you take them, Sam, and give them to your son? Well, Judge Conway was Caruso's lawyer. I mean, you cannot, this is New York, folks. So my father takes me to hear Wagner. I'm 14 years old. Bum, 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 bum. And I go, you know, it's like, wait a minute. The sound of it, I couldn't believe it. Then I studied piano with various people. One person used to hit me rap me on the knuckles. I didn't like him, Mr. Magnus, I remember. So my father finally got Consuelo Elsa Clark, a woman who was kind of like a grande dame who wore a gown to her lessons in Rockville Center. We had moved to Baldwin at that point. My father got a GI mortgage because he'd been a GI during the World War. And Consuelo Elsa Clark taught at the New York College of Music from 1918 to 1968. And she had many well-known students. In the back of the pianos, she had two Steinways in her old Victorian house that she grew up in Rockville Center. She had two portraits, which her aunt had gotten at the 1886 Bayreuth Festival of Franz Liszt and Richard Wagner looking at each other. Those are actually, and she had magazines from the Bayreuth Festival she gave me. So I studied with her, and she inculcated in me this amazing knowledge of theory. She gave me books from the 1920s that she had studied, of Percy Getchus's Grammar of Music. You know, I studied this crazy stuff. But I outgrew that quickly, and I was starting to compose actively at 14. And then little pieces. By the time I was 18, I had a big amount of juvenilia, most of which I discarded, except some of the more valuable stuff. But it never stopped. And then I graduated to, you know, the more learned professors, like a jazz pianist by the name of Joseph Shiani, who lived in the NYU houses. But then with Elie Siegmeister, who was a major teacher, had studied with Nadia Boulanger, and gave me the training that he got in the 20s when he was there with Aaron Copland. Through him, I met Aaron Copland. And I met many other luminaries who came to the house. Nicholas Slonimsky, Sidney Cowell, the widow of Henry Cowell, the man who premiered the Berg Violin Concerto. I mean, I met all these people at his house, normal meetings. And Siegmeister regaled me with stories of his pieces being done by Toscanini and Stokowski, who I met through him, Metropolis. It was just a great milieu to be in, and he was an extremely difficult teacher, putting me through the Boulanger training, which I now put my students through, which is years and years and years of 16th century counterpoint, of canon and fugue. I give you the illustration.
Mhm.
Behind me is this painting, and then there's a sheetrock wall. There's a chest of drawers here. But if there was a fancy cabinet, I would say to you, can any carpenter make that? Carpenter might be able to put up the sheetrock against studs, right? But can somebody really make a fine cabinet?
Hmm.
So what I tell students is, if you want to write a symphony or sonata or good songs, pure instrumental piece for a solo instrument, how are you going to do this unless you've trained? You got to study with a master teacher who's gone through with his master teacher when he was an apprentice, she was an apprentice. You can't think you're going to write anything with counterpoint and development and 4 or 5 minutes, 20 minutes, 2.5 hours of content. It's no different than the great jazz musicians that I met, who, like Louis Armstrong and Buck Clayton and Coleman Hawkins and Stan Kenton, all of those people worked constantly with other people, learning their craft over many, 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 many decades. It takes time.
Hmm.
But now let's talk about eating and breathing. I was with a conductor, a young conductor, Kalina Bovell, recently. She was assisting at Nashville, where I was with my.
Yeah, I know Kalina.
You know Kalina?
Yeah, I do.
Very different. She's a sweetheart. In
Yeah.
any event, Kalina and I were together with Giancarlo Guerrero at Nashville Symphony. Gigi, we call him, Giancarlo is very different. So we were down there and we were walking to lunch. Kalina says to me, how do you compose? Do you ever think about why you compose? I said, okay, Kalina, what are we doing now? She says, we're going to get a sandwich. I said, yeah, same thing. I have to eat. You all have to eat. We all have to breathe, but I have to write. I have to hear. It's constant. Hours and hours a day, 7 days a week, unless I'm about to conduct an orchestra. And if I'm about to conduct an orchestra or play piano in a concert, I'm studying those scores and playing them or figuring out with like an orchestra. I'm conducting the Royal Philharmonic in London in November at Abbey Road Studios where the Beatles were. And before I get in front of that orchestra, which is one of the greatest orchestras in the world, I am going to study my scores so intensely. So about 6 weeks, I will do nothing else. I won't be writing my music. I'll be studying scores. I'm conducting at the Atlanta Opera, where I hope you all can come at October 28th, my Frankenstein, the movie opera. Although I've done this piece over 20 times, it's been done over 60 times worldwide, I'll still be studying it because when I get in front of that orchestra, I have to know their parts better than they do. I have to understand the context. I have to understand everything. So what is this all coming down to? I have to be making that great break front cabinet. I have to be a master carpenter or master chef or master whatever. It's just an enormous amount of work. It also helps that I've had training that I still rely on. One final example, when I conducted the BBC before the pandemic, the BBC National Orchestra of Wales in Cardiff, in my music, and it's a recording that's available on the platforms. We came to a piece of mine that I'd written in my early 20s, which had late 20s, which had multiple meters, meaning 5/8, 4/8, 3/8, whatever. And I was conducting away and they weren't getting it. And the concert mistress said, why did you do it in quavers? Eighth notes. So I said, So I thought back of my studies at Juilliard with Madame Renée Longy, who I tell you a story about, refresh my recollection later, tell you a story about Madame Longy. And she taught us rhythmic dictation. I was in her advanced class. So I started to go into whack, 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 steady eighths.
Right.
And then the orchestra pop did it. So training gets you through those things. And I don't care who you are. I've seen Pierre Boulez work with the Juilliard Orchestra and the Philharmonic. And I saw the way he would, do his Pierre Boulez thing. And that comes out of his conservatoire background.
Mm-hmm.
question about it. And through, what we call rhythmic solfege.
Mm-hmm.
If he hadn't had it when he was in his teens and 20s,
Right.
he couldn't get in front of these
Right.
orchestras and do it. Same thing
Over time.
over time. So that little boy had to be trained and
Right.
had to continually reach scores, which I still do all the time.
But I love the fact that you said that, I mean, it's obvious that your parents recognized the gift in you and they really nurtured that.
They did. There was opposition too, because my dad was worried, feast or famine in the arts and all that kind of stuff. And I've had to diversify how I raised 4 children and had a house in Chappaqua and pay the mortgage like everybody else and do all that stuff. I've diversified as far as business leanings. I've had to do that. At this stage of my life, I'm mostly thinking about the next performance and the next recording.
Mm-hmm.
You get to a stage too where you want to park everything in one spot, especially with having a family and the blessings of grandchildren.
Mm-hmm.
So, you start to think about that and, walk a lot.
So tell us about this wonderful piece, The Voices of the Holocaust.
Yeah.
I know the world premiere was in November of 2022.
Yeah.
And how did that piece come about? I heard one of your interviews and I was, well, tell us, how did that piece come about?
Voices is a work of spirituality. It is not meant solely for a Jewish audience that may
Right.
have survivor relatives. It is a human rights piece.
I totally got that when I heard it. Yes.
If I could write a piece about Cambodia, if I could write a piece about what Putin is doing to Bakhmut, if I could write a piece about the Middle Passage, if I could write a piece about Uganda, I would do it. My background is in the fact that the family of mine that did not go to America 100 years ago stayed in Poland and in Western Ukraine. We think at least 75 human beings of old to very young. They were all massacred, except for one.
In your family?
My family.
Hmm.
They were all, mostly the Polish ones were on trains to Treblinka, which was a death camp where there wasn't work. Work isn't, a completely ridiculous term. There was no work. The few people that so-called work were the ones who were disposing of bodies and ash. So the madness of the Nazis and their collaborators throughout Europe were to kill and destroy. And it's not just 6 million Jewish people. I mean, the numbers are 60 million, we think, of who was killed in the middle of this madness from the steppes of Russia all the way to Spain, Just horrendous. My father was in the First Army. I have his letters where he talks about going from one German city to the other, and they're all demolished. And he's writing. My dad got to France right after D-Day. He was also in the Philippines and was put on guard duty when a Japanese soldier came out of the hills to gather food from the garbage. And he was told to shoot everybody.
Hmm.
My father let him go. He says, my father was a wonderful person. He said, what am I supposed to do? Kill that guy? And that guy hopefully became a grandfather.
Hmm.
So Voices is very personal. In the mid-90s, I was the first music consultant to the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum, which is a phenomenal place where everyone should go. It's on the mall. It's one of the official part of the Smithsonian.
Right.
And the successor of that is the African American Museum, right, and all the other Smithsonian museums. Mm-hmm. So, when I was there, I was music consultant, which meant I put on concerts with members of the National Symphony, Stephen Honigberg, a very fine cellist who's still there. And I put on a series of concerts over a 2-year period in the concert hall in the Holocaust Museum, in the basement, Meyerhoff Hall. Beautiful.
Right.
And it was music of the emigres, like Korngold, who wrote all the Errol Flynn movies, Castelnuovo Tedesco, the Italian Jewish composer who fled, and taught Jerry Goldsmith, Andre Previn, John Williams. He was a teacher of these guys. And also the music of Ernst Toch, who fled Germany and was also in Hollywood. But we also did the music of those composers who I felt a personal connection to, who were destroyed in Auschwitz and in France. The people like, 60 to 70 million deaths, that's right. Who the composers like Ullmann, Krasa, Haas, and Klein were all destroyed in one day in Auschwitz, having survived the horrors of Theresienstadt. Those composers are kind of links because many of them were connective tissue to Arnold Schoenberg and the Viennese school, and also the Janáček in Czechoslovakia. And their destruction led to a kind of craziness in music that happened after their killing, where music became very abstract and not connected to ordinary people. The so-called 12-tone movement that happened after the war, people like Boulez and Stockhausen. No, I'm not denigrating their movement, but I'm saying that connective tissue was destroyed by Hitler. And many of us have brought it back. Voices is as a result of my finding a book in the bookstore at the Holocaust Museum in 1995, 96, something like that. And it was a book of Sephardic poetry of the Shoah. Now this, as you may know, the Jewish religion is composed of many different groups, the so-called Ashkenazic group from Eastern Europe, which is my background. But then there's the Sephardic group, which includes people of all races. People also don't know that 40% of world Jewry has brown skin. People don't know this. I mention it only in the sense that this is a human rights piece.
Right.
So let's get back to this. I found this poetry. It was all in multiple languages. It was in Spanish, Italian, French, Ladino, which is the language, common language of the so-called Mediterranean Jews. Ladino, like Latin. It is a combination of Latin, Spanish, Italian, and French. Like Yiddish, which you've heard of, is a combination of German, and Austrian dialect, and Polish, and Russian, and so forth. You see, kind of a mixed salad. So I found this poetry, and I found it to be incredibly strong in the multiple languages. But I did nothing with it for 20 years.
20 years.
In 2015, at the urging of Deborah Simkin King, who's the conductor of the Ember Choral Arts and one of the greatest choral directors in the world, very well-known woman who mostly does new music. She was pushing me, Michael, you must do this. 7 months, I wrote the whole thing, fully orchestrated, fully written, fully done. And it's a full hour. And, you know, if you think about a piece for a long time, it can come out really fast. Shostakovich's method was this way too. And it's my method to a certain degree. I think a lot. And then I describe my compositional work as, if you ever had bouillon cubes, you know, those little cubes for chicken or
beef.
They used to serve them on boats, you know, if you were, you know, they would you like some bouillon? so my compositional ideas are kind of like bouillon cubes. They come out and then I have to throw hot water over them. And it's interesting how it works. I don't think, I used to compose at the piano. I don't anymore. I compose completely in my head and I write it down in a software called Sibelius, which prints it in very beautiful form. It looks engraved. You have to tweak it to make it publishable. But that's how I compose. So I wrote the piece in 2015 and then she was about to do it. And then of course we all got sick.
Right.
My entire family, I got deathly sick in March of 2020. I was hospitalized. And while I was there, Voices had been finished. I said to myself, I'm getting out of here because I want to be with my loved ones. And I must write The Slave, which is an opera based on a book by Isaac Bashevis Singer, who won the Nobel Prize in 1978. I first read the book when I was 20.
Mm.
And I said, I got to make an opera out of this, even then. And I got the phone book. In those days, we had phone books. Everybody remember phone books? And there he was. He's in the phone book. Isaac Bashevis Singer, West 86th Street, with his address and his phone number. I said, I'm not going to call him. It's like too pushy. But I wrote a letter. And he wrote me back. Dear Mr. Shapiro, thank you for your letter. You might even be a famous man, but I don't know anything about opera. Do you mind speaking to my agent? This is her name, at Farrar Strauss. So I got in contact with her and she says, oh, it's a wonderful idea, but I'm afraid Paramount Pictures wants to do it. He had just sold to Barbara Streisand his Yentl stories, which she made into a movie. So I didn't get the rights. And I did a lot of other things over the time, but I chased it. And finally, from his, right before the pandemic started, I got the rights from his agent who was representing the family, the grandchildren. And I have the rights. And then I got a wonderful librettist. Her name is Hannah McDermott. She's 30 years old, went to Juilliard, met to Oxford, a singer who writes poetry and plays, fascinating person who really knows the singing voice. But here's a story very quickly. It takes place in 1648, Poland. Wait a minute, 1648, what relevance? Well, in 1648, there was a massive massacre. 100,000 Jews were killed in the southern part of Poland in a kind of pre-Holocaust by the Cossacks, who just decided to come in and have some fun killing people. And that's what they did. And they killed 100,000 people. And it's from the area that my grandmother's from, exactly. So we could have had descendants, ancestors who lived through this nonsense. So Jacob, who's the hero of the book, he doesn't know what happens to his wife as his entire village is getting destroyed, and he's sold into slavery. He spends 4 years on a mountaintop taking care of a cow and scything wheat. And this kind of scholarly guy becomes like he's a member of the Israeli Defense Forces. He becomes this macho guy. And he's up on this hill, but he's still a slave. His master's daughter, who's a Polish Roman Catholic woman, a widow in her late 20s, he's in his late 20s by this point, falls in love with him. And he falls in love with her. That's 1652.
Right.
The area has survived Cossack invasion, Swedish invasion, pestilence, plague, religious hatred, both directions, Poles hating Jews, Jews hating Poles, Jews hating Cossacks, Poles hating Swedes. You know, it's like horrible. Xenophobia, religious hatred. My story is better than your story. That going back to what I was saying at the beginning. Nonsense, folks. Nonsense. No story is better than the other. They're all good. And they all have elements of wonderful things like the Sunday gathering. So it's the story of what happens to them in the Polish village, how he escapes, and how he comes back for her. And she's in a horrible state because she thinks she's been abandoned. Second half is in a Jewish village that's being rebuilt, but it's being rebuilt by some very bad people. There's a Polish lord who leads that village with his wife, who was ransacked by those Swedes. And they're kind of interesting people. So what happens in the Jewish village? Now, she can't speak because she's a Polish woman.
Right.
So they have scenes between the two of them, but she goes into childbirth at the end, and she starts to speak Polish. Well, you can imagine how it happens. So the evil people in the village, the evil Jewish people in the village, there's some wonderful people too. It's a mix.
Right.
The political types who run the place throw him out with the baby. And he comes back 20 years later and meets the gravedigger, the person who takes care of the burial site. And they're looking for it. And the guy says, I think they buried it where they buried the donkeys. Bad stuff. So he remembers her and he prays to her and he falls down on the ground. And he sings to her as they sang in their love section back in the first act. And then she answers him. And he rises out of his clothes, a young man, and goes towards the light. And she says to him, Jacob, never leave me again. Hurting. So, okay. So what did I just tell you? Get shivers talking about this, right?
Mhm.
The love between two people, no matter where they're from, no matter what stories they were born into, is more important than anything. And it's the love that we all have to show each other on this Sunday night and every day of the week, no matter the story that's being told against us or our story against that. So when I conduct the Verdi Requiem, I'm conducting the Latin Requiem Mass, I'm rejoicing in it. When I conduct a Schubert Mass, I'm rejoicing in it. When I go to Catholic Church, my cousin who became a federal judge became a nun. I rejoice in her. I rejoice in the services we have. I rejoice in all of this. I rejoice in reading, as I read St. Paul as a kid. I rejoice in all of it. I rejoice in the teachings of Buddha. I rejoice in all of it. Because what is it? Where is it going to? And this comes into the music. It is about spirituality. It is about giving love. It is about restraining ourselves from behavior we shouldn't do. And that's difficult often. So in music, I've had the great love and benefit of being around some incredible people who believed in a lot of this, but these are lessons that continually have to be taught, and we can do it through art. We certainly can in painting, in poetry, in novel writing, showing the light that I'm going to have coming out of her body at the end of her spirit, out of the end of that opera. It's going to just blind the audience. So, and the light, when he talks about in the first act, it's before he's had his loving relationship with her, but he's tormented about it. And I can't do this. I just can't do it. And then he starts thinking, he hasn't had the physical 6, books of Moses, what we call the Torah. He hasn't had that because he's been a slave up on this mountainside for years.
Right.
So, he used to read it and study it and think about it, but he hasn't had it. So he starts to knock into this is Singer's visuals, but I'm going to have it. It's actually in the opera where he's knocking into a rock, trying to put the interdictions of the Lord into the rock. Not only the 10 commandments, but we supposedly have 613 commandments how to live.
Right.
So, and he's trying to think, I'm going to knock everyone in. But at the same time, he's thinking of Wanda.
Right. So, Michael, when you're doing your pieces, like you had that, you did voices. Did I hear correctly? You said in 7 months, all of it?
Yeah.
Okay.
I wrote it in 7 months. It's eight movements with a full hour. Right.
So when you're doing this, I mean, do you feel a force behind you when you're, I mean, I know you have the skill, you've been working, but I mean, like a download like that, do you feel that? Not only do you feel it, like you acknowledge that it's something so much higher than you.
We have to.
Yeah.
Have to. I often think of the film composers. I mean, Gone with the Wind is now a very controversial movie for certain reasons. But I think of the composer Steiner, who got a call to write a score in like 8 weeks, and he came up with that melody. When you think about what John Williams has to do, I mean, I met him, he's a sweetheart of a man, but when he had to do E.T. In a very short period of time, and he got that melody out of him. So with this poetry, I had been familiar with it for a 20-year period. I hadn't looked at it every day, obviously, but I remember being taken with it. Now, I didn't use all of the poems from the book. I used selected ones. When you write when you write music to words, you do what Aaron Copland spoke about. Aaron used to say that you try to find the melody in the poetry or in the words. Now, Aaron was not a great vocal composer. He wasn't. He was an instrumental person. Lenny was the great, you could use, of that era, was the great composer to set words. But if you look at Shakespeare, for example, other than the songs in Shakespeare, you look at, to be or not to be, that is the question, or Macbeth, or any of the, a lot of it can't be said. Why? There's too much music in Shakespeare, in the syllables.
Right.
If you look at the King James Bible, for example, in that which was a contemporary piece, pretty much a little later than Shakespeare's life, but in that language, a lot of it can't be said because it's got so much music in it already. But there's some poetry that has no music in it, and it can't be said either. It's too dry. It's somewhere in between. So the poems that I selected drove me to do this. Listen, there have been other pieces that have tried to deal with what happened. I'm very proud of the sense that I was able to accomplish this because I did something with distance from what happened. It's now a great number of years, 70 odd years. But the force, definitely. It's no different than writing a symphony or writing a sonata. But here you have also a political element. I shouldn't say that, an element of great tragedy, which you had to deal with. But again, I chose movements with different intent. So for example, one movement is qui in questa terra in Italian, here in this earth. It's a partigiani song, canto. It's a song of partisans who are not taking any garbage, as it were. They are going into the forest, they're gathering weapons, and they're fighting back. And the partisan in Qui in Questa Terra says, I'm so glad my mother was able to die in her village and didn't have to go through this, where my brothers and my father had perished.
Wow.
So I had to make a partigiano song,
Right.
That's Qui in Questa Terra. Then I have a French movement, La prière du juif persécuté en français, which is the prayer of the persecuted Jew. It could be persecuted anybody, but persecuted Jew. And it's written where this persecuted Jew is saying, I'm looking forward to a time where this doesn't exist. So what did I do? I wrote a cabaret song. Because I've spent a lot of wonderful time in Paris, France.
Right.
And I understand that music and the music of the singers like Trenet and Chevalier and so forth. And I was able to draw on that knowledge to write this music, which is very different.
Well, we have, I have it queued up, the first movement.
Yeah, let me talk about that.
Yeah, please, because I'd like to play a bit of it for.
It's called Anima Amin.
Yes.
And it's meaning with full faith, I believe in the coming of the Messiah. Now, in Jewish life, we say, though he tarry. I'm sorry. Well, look, it's an issue of one story versus another. But if you look closely at the words of Joshua ben Joseph, Jesus of Nazareth, Jesus being a Latin Roman name for a Jewish guy, you see all of the structure and meaning of Judaism. It's all there.
Right.
Temple from the Mount. It's all there in the writings of St. Paul, in the epistles. It's all there. It's the same. So Maimonides, who was the great sage in Spain 1,000 years ago, who was the doctor to Saladin, who Richard the Lionhearted fought. He was the doctor who came every day to take care of Saladin's harem and all the little kids running around, and then went home to a little village outside of Alexandria, I think it was, or Cairo, where he then had a group of people waiting to get in to see Dr. Maimonides. And then after that, he wrote genius writings about spirituality, which are still very, very, The Guide to the Perplexed, is a famous book. In any event, Anima Amin is based on his statement, I believe in the coming of the Messiah, with full faith, which we all do. for what it means.
Mhm.
Okay. Now, on that same train, one of those trains to Treblinka, coming from a village probably not far from where my grandmother was from, but she fled in 1912 from America, was a man, Ariel David Fastag, who was a singer at his synagogue and started to sing Ani Ma'amin to the people in the cattle car.
Mm.
And he made a great melody. That melody he taught to two men who somehow were able to get the cattle car door open, and they jumped to preserve the melody and to take it back to Ariel David Fastag's rabbi and his flock, who had fled, a lot of them had fled to Palestine, then called Palestine. One was killed immediately. He must hit a tree, we don't know. The other one fled and was able to survive the war and got to Palestine, and through the son of the rabbi, got the melody to the rabbi. Well, it turns out that this melody was somehow picked up by other Jews on their way to the gas chambers.
Wow.
Throughout Europe. We don't know how, but the melody passed, and it is phenomenal. Well, I arranged it in my own way, and that's the first movement.
Great. Lisa, would you like to play that? I hope we can all hear it. Wow. Absolutely beautiful.
Yeah, well, just again, Daniel Mutlu was a soloist. He's senior cantor of Central Synagogue on 55th in Lexington, which is that synagogue you were seeing. So one
Yeah.
of the most amazing places built in the 1880s.
Wow.
Deborah Simkin King conducted her chorus, the Amber Choral Arts, with the American Modern Ensemble, which is an orchestra composed of Broadway players,
Wow.
top people.
Top people.
Yeah,
Absolutely beautiful.
thank you.
Hey, listen, we're running out of time here, and I want to just open up. If there's anyone on who would like to ask Michael a question, or just share some feelings, I would love for you to come back on screen and let's just take some time to open this up for question. Whew, that was beautiful. Every time I hear it, I get chills.
Yeah,
I really do. It's beautiful.
thank you.
It's beautiful. So
Please.
does anyone have any questions?
Happy to talk.
I do. Your work is incredibly moving, and the way you talk about music is incredibly moving as well. And just your deep passion for training and all of the different, you speak with such it seems to me that you create with such a sense of love and kind of a grander sense of things. And so I just wonder, from your perspective, what would you say that the role of the artist in the world, in society, is, from your perspective?
Well, I think of Bach and Beethoven and Monteverdi and Verdi. There have been some composers who are not great people, Wagner being the primary one. But most of the colleagues that I've had in this field have been interested only in creating the best possible art we can have. I mean, Lenny was one great example. His whole life was just driven by it, Bernstein. But it's, as I mentioned, what I had said to our friend Kalina, I mean, we have to. We must. We don't have any choice. So if you're a sculptor, or as I saw somebody's a sculptor, or writing words, or poetry, or gospel singer, or whatever you're doing, painting, you have to. Because it comes from where you are as a human being, where you are with your family, where you have been, where you want to go. When I was in the hospital with COVID, I said, where have I been? But where am I going? You have to ask those questions all the time. With a group of people who are interested in seeking through art a higher spirituality, I would say it's a constant thing. It's a constant thing for any artist to continually think about generating beauty. Part of the problem that some people had with audiences with music after the war, with people like Boulez and Stockhausen, a lot of the music was ugly. But when I spoke to Boulez about it, I mean, he said, well, that's what we were reacting to because we were victims of the war. It's interesting. And they felt through a certain kind of organization, they could organize things, but it was too intellectual. A lot of it didn't come from feeling and from melody. I came from a pop tradition, a jazz tradition, and also from classical tradition, but I combined them. And that's why I want to reach an audience immediately. Like, thank you for your comments very much, Adrienne, about the beginning of Voices. This full hour takes one through all the various countries that people were destroyed in or had reactions to. So it was very natural for me to write this because it's, Holocaust studies and being involved in the music of the show has been something that's been part of my life. And connection. My teachers, fled Nazi Germany. Karl Bamberger, my conducting teacher, fled 1938 with Russian passport things because he conducted Shostakovich premieres. And he said he would have killed right away in the Anschluss. His mother was killed in Theresienstadt, in Terezin. I mean, so there's a lot of personal connection to what we do. We all have personal connection. We all do. I would say that, when composition students, when I teach at colleges, go in as a teacher, I say to people, we're all geniuses for a few bars, but then we have to know what we're doing. And that becomes a lot of study. If you're a sculptor, you have to understand the history of sculpture. You have to continually see what people are doing, and you have to see what has been done. You know, I'm continually studying Gustav Mahler and Schoenberg and Ives and Lenny, even, you know, everybody, always studying it. And other composers you may not have encountered who I knew. So a lot of exposure that generates what it's generate out of you. We have what we call God-given talent, but we have a role to, in the words of J.S. Bach, to work very hard. There's no other way to bring it out. That means revisions. And when I was in Firenze years ago in Florence, and I went to the Academy and I saw the David of of Michelangelo and the other sculptures that are there of the people coming out of marble. You know, he was ambidextrous, chipping away at that marble. Think about it. It's a block of marble and out comes the David. Excuse me. So he really knew what he really knew what he had to do, and to just chop these out. But again, he had technique. He learned in the quarries. So work. It shall come.
Mm-hmm.
Questions, please, everybody else. I see a beautiful cat there. Somebody's got a beautiful cat. I love cats. Really? No one else?
Anyone else have any questions that you'd like to ask? Cornelia, do I see you kind of leaning forward?
Don't be shy.
I wonder if we're kind of a little bit overwhelmed, you know, sort of like, you know, when you keep silent after seeing or hearing something that's very moving or meaningful. So it's not a lack of curiosity, it's more like, well, if I ask my question, it'd be like, okay, that's another whole session that we need just to explore it, that sort of thing, you know. So yeah, so the silence isn't lack of interest. I think it's just like we're just received so much.
Well, where are you located, Cornelia?
Vancouver Island, Canada, on the right.
I studied at Shawnigan Lake.
Oh, did you? Did you go to boarding school there?
No, it was the summertime. There was a very wealthy man who decided to open up the Shawnigan Lake Music Festival.
Oh, wow.
And I studied there with Sir Malcolm Arnold. Crazy. Remember the bridge over the Wye? And mostly he was 49 years old and mostly studying drinking with him because he loved to drink. But Janos Starka was there, who I accompanied, Ruggiero Ricci. It was like an incredible list of luminaries because this man could basically buy talent. He was so wealthy.
Wow.
And sit around the table, you know, having dinner with this incredible wealthy man and his wife who wanted to study piano.
Oh, who knew anything so significant happened in Vancouver Island? That's I took the seat. Diana Kroll, so.
Oh yeah.
And who's never mind, Tommy Lee's ex-wife.
But I remember taking the seaplane from Nanaimo to Vancouver and arriving in the water in Vancouver. That was really something. What a great place you live. Blessing.
Yeah, I feel very fortunate. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Okay.
Well,
Susan.
Go ahead.
Hi, Susan.
Hi. Thanks so much. I'm really glad, Cornelia, that you addressed that we were in a sense of transcendence and overwhelm in the most positive, wonderful way from hearing your music, and especially all of the grounded and deeply riveting and sad stories of the Shoah that are just in it. And I just want to thank you for giving us such a rich experience. My question is one that's very different, though. I found that I'm an opera singer, and I found that I had an experience singing Wagner recently, And afterwards, it was something so powerful because of my Jewish friend who's also a conductor, Aaron Sherber. He talked about how he had such a push and pull. He loved Wagner's music when he was growing up, but he knew exactly what an anti-Semite he was. And he knew, and when I was preparing for the role, I talked with Aaron a lot. And anyway, my question is, you have this deep, rich history connected to sadness, and it definitely, as I hear it, it informs your work. But as artists, how do we use that and not be overwhelmed by it? What is the structure that you're able to put around that? And so it can be useful to all of us, but not overwhelming personally. Thanks for letting me ask that.
Susan, beautiful. When Mozart was very ill, he wrote the Requiem. We know this if you've seen Amadeus. But right before that, he wrote the 39th, 40th, and 41st symphonies, his best symphonies, in 6 weeks, all 3. He was having financial issues. And remember, he was a father with a wife and 2 little kids. He was having real issues and taking care of them. He was stressed out of his mind. And he writes these pieces, which are just, creme de la creme, ethereal, beautiful, aesthetically perfect pieces, right? Your personal story, your existing situation, your future situation, whatever it is one part of you. But depending upon the subject matter of what you're doing, the subject matter is what's important, not necessarily what you're going through. So I would say that when I wrote this piece, it took 20 years to face up to the fact that I had a responsibility to do it, but I did it with all my talent and skill. Listen, I've written other works, many other works, which have very different qualities. And you can hear all of these things. A lot of them are recorded. I am blessed with great recordings on Spotify and YouTube and so forth. So please go and take a look and a listen. My piano concerto is called Archangel, and it was a viral recording. It was Stephen Beck, again, the pianist with the BBC National Orchestra of Wales, recorded right before the pandemic. And during the pandemic, it took off. It did really, really well as far as radio stations playing it. And radio became the hottest thing because everybody was home. And voices, and the Archangel was played all over the world. Now, Archangel is in 2 movements, lasting a half an hour, 15 and 15. It's derived from Paradise Lost of John Milton, in which he describes in incredible language the colossal fight that went on before the universe was created, between Satan, who was thrown out of heaven, and the Archangel, who came down from heaven to protect heaven from Satan and the demons. Good versus evil. The second half of Archangel is about Adam and Eve and Eden, from which we're all derived. And the Archangel pushing them out into the world we live in because of the eating of the apple, which was given to her in the story, amazing story in the Bible, by Satan in the form of a serpent. Now, why that piece? Well, the thing that I am most obsessed about is good versus evil. And I think anybody of spirituality or not spirituality has to be worried about and think about. So all of my work, when I was in the hospital, COVID, you get to think about these things. Am I going to the great unknown? I call it the great composer's room, if I'm so lucky, Played billiards with Mozart. He beat me every time. But I thought of, and I thought of, where have I been? Where am I going? And the thought for any artist has to be why? Where, why, and when? Not just I'm showing off because I've got this great voice or I can really play like a virtuoso. That wasn't what was driving Otto Rubinstein and Lenny and driving Louis Armstrong and Stan Kenton and those guys and all gals, Alicia de la Rocha, people that I grew up with. Wasn't driving them, Nadia Boulanger. What was driving them was exactly what I'm talking about. the aesthetic of, and it's in the best of our religions, the opposition of what we need to do through love in making this world a better place. I thought of one thing which I want to throw out to you, which I think is truly indicative of art making. When you're in a death spiral, as I was I had COVID throughout my lungs and kidney failure. I read this later in the medical reports. Somehow I got through. I was thinking, of course, there's good and evil things. Where have I been? Where am I going? This is what I was thinking about. I got to write The Slave when I get out of here, my opera. And I thought about reducing things from their highest level all the way down. And reducing things was health. Health was overriding. Health of the planet, health of all living and inanimate things, health of the ocean, health of the soil, health of the plants, health of everyone. If you use health and you work down, human rights is right there. Economic rights are right there. Religious rights are right there. Religion used to help us understand and to amplify the best parts of us. The best parts of us. And to make sure that we make the world Eden for all of us. We can only make Eden place of Eden if we conquer climate issues, which are for real, guys. They really are. And they affect everything. It's health, 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 health. And if you take health and work it down, it's everything. It's all the spiritual things that we worry about. It's all the things, Susan, you're asking about of creativity, because creativity comes from health and the ability to physically and emotionally and mentally do what Mozart did with those 3 symphonies in 6 weeks, or me in 7 months with voices. Same thing.
Can I jump in there? Like when you're saying that health, and you said creativity comes from health, but creativity also causes health.
Yeah.
It causes health. But when you said that, it was like that's what the word salvation means.
Mm-hmm.
To salve,
Yes.
right? To heal. That's the motivation.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Salve in Latin, salvation, totally the same. When you think of the caring that people give, Teresa Stratus, the great singer, Susan, you know who she is, and I have friends, and at the top of her career at the Met, she decided to go work for Mother Teresa in Bombay or Calcutta, wherever it was. Can you imagine what she did there? And Mother Teresa would pick on her. Mother Teresa was like Madame Logie was to me, my solfege teacher. She was a tough character. And she was Stratus was a worldwide famous opera singers. They are doing bedpans in the middle of India. Can you imagine? Why? Because she believed in the issues of salvation and hope and love. That's the way she is. It's an interesting thing. So from salvation, from hope, from health, come these instincts for all of us, no matter what our disciplines are. And, even no matter what job you've got. There's so many examples of people doing, all kinds of things that if they keep it in them, it helps their lives. It helps the lives with their families. And it's something to inculcate in our kids and grandkids. I love talking with people who know these issues, which you all do.
Anyone else? And Michael, I really appreciate you staying over. If someone else has maybe one more question or so, I don't want to be true to our time here.
That's fine.
But is there anyone else who has any comments or a question that you have for Michael? I would say speak now.
But you can always reach me. info@michaelshapiro.com. Feel free. I'm really happy to speak to people. Emails
That's great.
better than talk.
Karen?
Hi, Karen.
Hi, I don't mean to be rude, but that story about the cattle cars in that song. It's all true.
Yes. I know this for,
And it got carried along and sung.
we don't
in
know how
other-
it happened. Karen, we don't know how it happened. God's work, who knows? Can you imagine? Now, it turns out that the flutist in the orchestra that I conducted for 16 years, the Chappaqua Orchestra, her youngest daughter married the great-grandson of that man.
Oh, wow, really?
Fostek family still exists. And the great-grandson married my flutist's daughter. And I told her the story, and they've received exactly what you heard. Went to the Fostek family. Can you imagine?
Yes.
Yeah, it's really true. If you look at Wikipedia and you put in Fastag, you can read the story. It's all there.
Okay. Thank
You
you very much.
Thank you. I mean, it's just crazy stuff, Karen, isn't it?
And it's beautiful. I mean,
Yeah, the melody is exquisite. And I did my own arrangement, as you could see, with the chords and so forth. And with that amazing singer, so in that incredible hall. And then it was done again at the Reagan Library in March. Wolf Blitzer was the narrator from CNN, and it was done by the LA Master Chorale with Grant Gershon conducting very well. It's also on YouTube and so forth.
wish I'd been taking notes the whole time. Thank you.
Anita, did you have a question you wanted to ask? Oh, we can't hear you. Thank you.
Very welcome.
Thank you.
Blessings, everybody. Be well. Be
All
safe.
right. Well, Michael, God bless you. And I can't wait to hear this in person.
Well, come to the other stuff too. There's
I will.
a mile-long catalog.
I know. I know.
You know, it's always a joy. This piece, though, had a tremendous impact, and it was seen by tens of thousands of people through the network that Central Synagogue has. It's really
Yeah.
good.
Well, thank you so much for your time, and thank you for staying true to your calling and to be able to share it with us. I think it's just really, it's been a joy. So thank you
Thank you,
very,
Adrienne.
very much.
Thank you very much.
All right, family,
Thank you.
Convergence family, thank you for hanging out. And we went a little over, but thanks for hanging out, and your participation is just always great with these Artscapes to Heartscape. So thanks a lot.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you,
Okay.
Michael. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, bye.